Hello friends, and today I bring you an updated Succession Witch PvE guide. Now, I know what you want to do, skip through to the combo section and just copy it over. But trust me, grinding without combo is a lot easier than you think. Let's get a refresher on the class basics. If you already know what all passives do, familiar with buff rotation MMA mechanic, feel free to skip over to the priority list section. First things first, if you are a newer player or leveling Witch, Succession is physically not playable until at least level 59, where we get our last instant cast passive. Due to that, I would suggest going Awakening until you hit level 60. Now that that's done, make sure to level all your passives except for weight training. Those 5 are the most important ones. They basically make the spec playable. For choice node spells, you want to grab those for PvE. It never changes for grinding, so you should be good to go. For locked skills, as you're learning the class, you could probably just lock Fireball, since that skill doesn't really do good damage and does sometimes clash with other more important skills if you're just learning the keybinds. Rabams or skill enhancements aren't really used in most of PvE, outside of some very niche situations. You can pick those two for general use, but the last one isn't used at all, ever. Which has a good number of casting speed effects, but sadly none of them stack, so they should not be used together. We have Speed Spell, Magical Palace, also known as ebuff, Self buff on Voltaic, and the usual Black Spirit Rage. Here's their buff priority. Higher priority means it overrides or stops the lesser ones from being applied. For example, if you already have a Speed Spell running and pop Magical Palace, once the Speed Spell effect runs out, you will lose the casting speed buff. For Black Spirit Rage, both Consumption and BSR Lightning are usable depending on the spot. However, as a newer player, I would suggest sticking to Absorb. Buff rotation is pretty intuitive. You want to use your shortest cooldown one first, so usually in grind spots, you would do something like BSR into Speed Spell, into Magical Palace, into Speed Spell again, into BSR again. For most of the spots, you can also use BSR earlier, since you will have downtime on the next rotation anyways, unless you can reach 100% BSR during your first speed spell. And in most endgame spots, BSR gives a sizable clear speed increase, thanks to AP, crit rate, and casting speed altogether. Now then, our spec works by casting skills with command inputs, like WC, SQ, SRMB, and others. So you should avoid using quick slots for anything that can be casted otherwise, since if you use them, you will not get the benefit of instant cast from our passives. Same goes for holding RMB to cast spells of the same element. You can technically do it, but it will be as bad as using them from quick slots. For keybinds that are hard to hit, for example S LMB RMB or Shift LMB RMB, you can buffer the input during previous skill. For example, you want to cast Blizzard after Earthquake. So as soon as you see Earthquake animation start, you can also start holding down the Blizzard inputs. Any prime skill can be instant cast after any other prime skill, including after teleport, magical evasion, MMA, earth response, and even Magnus skill. After the recent nerf, we no longer want to actually spam MMA in every spot of the video game after every skill, since respawns and pack-to-pack movement lets our skill recharge meanwhile, making the CDs much less of a problem. Elemental MMA can be cast after any element, each of them giving you a different special effect, but DPS wise they are all the same. So for PvE purposes, the only time MMA element matters is when mobs can be knocked down, since Fire MMA is the only one with down attack. If you're running out of mana without Mana Pot, you can use Mana Absorb by pressing space between skills, which tops off your mana and gives you a frontal guard for the duration, but deals a very insignificant amount of damage. There is another mechanic that is not really that important in PvE, but I felt the need to mention it anyways, is spell storage. If you start casting a spell, you can continue casting it after using magical evasion. Mostly that works if you don't instant cast it, but for some skills like Earth and Eruption, you can do it even mid-skill. You can cancel the stored spell if you press another skill right after magical evasion, before the stored one gets casted. Thanks to spell storage, you can also do earth response on a much longer range by doing magical evasion and pressing LMB while you're in the animation. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's talk about combo. Witch doesn't normally use a combo, as following a priority list is miles more effective over any combos I've tried, since that allows us to use the best spells basically on cooldown, greatly increasing our clear speed. Here are the general add-ons I'm using currently. You can swap them around if you want, like putting a plus DP somewhere or replacing down attack on MMA with something else, but honestly, I never felt the need to. Let me explain what the priority list is first, and then I'll go over how to actually execute it. The priority list is kind of a tier list, but for spells. The higher the spell is, the higher priority it has during grinding, meaning that you should use it as soon as it comes off cooldown, no matter where you are on your rotation. Because of that, it's very hard to make an actual combo that would be efficient and make sense, since your good spells will be off cooldown at different points depending on your buffs. For example, during BSR or speed spell, you might fit in one more spell between them, etc. At the very top of our priority list is, of course, Voltaic Pulse. It has exceptional DPS, and with my current add-ons is also our main DP shred skill, meaning it should always be on cooldown. The only exception being if you have one or two mobs at very low HP, and any other skill would finish them off just as well. Right next to our Voltaic, we have Elemental MMA, our number one DPS skill. Both Voltaic and MMA should be cast on cooldown. If you're grinding in a spot where mobs die in one rotation or less, you should use a magic DP debuff skill right after Voltaic to maximize MMA's damage. For example, you can use Earth Arrow, since it's pretty quick and has decent DPS. But overall, Earth Arrow is going to be in the Misc tier, since its use is purely situational. Right after those two, we have almost everything else, including Frigid Fog, both lightning skills, as they are connected, Meteor, the new skill Voltaic Discharge, Equilibrium, Fireball Explosion, and Earthquake. Skills from this tier can be cast in any order, depending on the add-ons you're running. For example, in my build, I have Monster AP on Equilibrium and Shift C. So while engaging a new pack without add-on buffs, I'm going to use one of those as soon as possible. There is not much else to explain with those, since they are all just good DPS options. In our third tier, the filler tier, we have Blizzard Domain, Magnus, and MMA during cooldown. The spells in this tier have decent DPS, but are mostly used to stall time until our real good spells come off cooldown. And for the last, but quite literally not least, we have the Misc tier, which has some skills that are situationally really good, but are just not in the highest priority tiers, simply because they aren't great to use everywhere. And so, Misc tier consists of Freeze and Lightning, while only using their first hit, which have one of the best DPS in our kit, almost rivaling that of Elemental MMA. And the only reason why they are not widely used is their very small hitbox, basically stopping them from being useful in AoE scenarios, which are present in about every spot in the video game. Next up are Earth Arrow and Earth Response, primarily used to debuff the target with a magical DP shred, but are only in Misc tier again, and not higher, since Earthquake also has a magic DP shred, boasts a better DPS and much better AoE than those two. Mana Absorb is insanely good to top off your mana if you still don't have a mana potion or are grinding with a Shy, when spamming skill gets kinda ridiculous, thanks to insane casting speed, draining your mana really quickly. The two Rabams, Swift Earthquake and Sage's Thunder, are also here. As far as I'm aware, Swift Earthquake has only one practical application in PvE, is to vacuum the small mobs in Dekia Thornwood during elite or boss waves, so you can force spawn next one faster. And Sage's Thunder can be used in pretty much any spot as a soft Blizzard domain cancel, or to restart the lightning chain by using RMB after it, if you messed up. Outside of the priority list, we also have some important skills, Red and Blue Orb. Red Orb is our taunt skill, that sadly has pretty limited application in modern spots, as it does not work in Dekia spots and most other in-game spots like DSR, Robot, and similar. It has also been known to bug out some of the Dekia spots, so I suggest just not using it at all until you're absolutely sure you know why you should. The Blue Orb gives us some movement speed and mana regen, and is pretty nice to use for spots like Jade, Orcs, Crypt, normal Oluns, Tungrad, and similar spots, which have a good chunk of pack-to-pack movement. Now that we've covered everything, let me showcase how that actually works. For the purpose of this video, I rearranged my cooldown slots to look like the priority list does. Starting the rotation, as explained earlier, we're gonna use Voltaic and Earth Arrow to debuff the mobs, followed by MMA and Equilibrium. And then go into our normal priority list, using our MMA and Voltaic on cooldown, while juggling other skills. Priority list might seem a bit scary, but in reality, it's pretty easy to execute on a decent level. Some spots will have a little bit different spell economy, which leads to saving certain skills. But in general, you can use this in pretty much every spot, starting from super early game one-shot spots, all the way to Darkseeker and other endgame zones. As mentioned before, as you start running out of mana, you can just stop mana absorb and go back to full mana pretty much instantly, and continue mashing random spells. I hope I answered most of your questions. If you have any more, feel free to ask them in the comment section or join our community Discord, where we have more helpful people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.